The day we buried my husband, it rained so hard the cemetery grass turned into dark, sinking mud. People kept saying that kind of rain meant heaven was grieving. I didn't know about heaven. All I knew was that Daniel Reed was gone, and the world suddenly felt like a house with the roof torn off. The funeral was in Seattle. Daniel had lived there his whole life, and so had I since we married 10 years earlier. He worked as a structural engineer. I managed a small interior design studio downtown. Our life wasn't extravagant, but it was stable, predictable, safe. At least that's what I thought until the phone call from the hospital. A sudden aneurysm. No warning. No time to say goodbye. Just like that, the future we had spent a decade building collapsed into paperwork, condolences, and a silence that followed me into every room. For the first few days after the funeral, I barely left our house. The house Daniel and I had bought 5 years earlier sat on a quiet street in North Seattle. Gray siding, a narrow front porch, and a maple tree that turned bright red every October. Daniel used to joke that the tree was more reliable than Seattle weather. Now the house felt too large for one person. Every object carried a memory. His coffee mug on the shelf, the jacket he left hanging by the door, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen table. Grief wasn't dramatic like movies showed. It didn't come as loud crying or emotional speeches. It was quieter, heavier, like carrying a weight that no one else could see. Exactly 1 week after the funeral, my phone rang while I was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by unopened sympathy cards. It was my younger sister, Lily Parker. "Megan," she said gently, "are you home? Where else would I be?" There was a small pause. "I know this is hard," she said, "but Jake keeps asking about you." Jake was her son, my nephew.
He was turning 6 that weekend.
"I can't do a birthday party right now, Lily." "It's not a big party," she insisted quickly. "Just family. Mom and Dad. A cake. Jake loves you. He keeps asking why Aunt Megan didn't come to see him." I closed my eyes. Lily and I had always been close growing up, but adulthood had complicated things. She was emotional, impulsive. I was careful. Still, Jake adored Daniel. And Daniel had adored him right back. Daniel used to build ridiculous Lego towers with him on the living room rug. He even taught him how to hold a tiny hammer during one of their construction lessons. The thought of disappointing Jake felt unfair. "Just for an hour," Lily added softly. "You don't even have to stay for the whole party." I looked around the quiet house. Staying here alone wouldn't make anything easier. "Fine," I said finally. 1 hour. The party was at my parents' house in a suburb north of Seattle. When I arrived that Saturday afternoon, colorful balloons were tied to the mailbox. Children's laughter floated through the open front door. For a moment, I almost turned around. Grief makes normal happiness feel foreign, like you're visiting someone else's life. But then Jake saw me through the window. "Aunt Megan." The front door burst open before I even reached the porch. Jake ran straight into my arms. For a second, something inside my chest cracked open. "You came," he shouted. "Of course I did," I said, forcing a small smile. Inside, the house smelled like pizza and chocolate frosting. My mother hugged me tightly in the kitchen. My father squeezed my shoulder with quiet sympathy. And Lily stood near the dining table, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not sadness. Not comfort. Something else. Something tense. At the time, I assumed it was just the awkwardness of grief. I had no idea that within the next 20 minutes, my sister was going to say something that would change everything I thought I knew about my husband and about my family. Because halfway through Jake's birthday party, Lily stood up in front of everyone and calmly announced that her son was actually Daniel's child. And that meant half of my house now belonged to him. Jake's birthday cake had just been placed on the table when everything changed. 6 candles flickered under the kitchen lights while the kids crowded around, chanting his name. "Blow them out. Blow them out." Jake squeezed his eyes shut and made a dramatic wish before blowing all 6 candles out at once. Everyone clapped. My mother wiped frosting from his cheek. My father poured lemonade. For a few minutes, everything felt almost normal. I even caught myself smiling. Jake ran to the living room to open presents, tearing through wrapping paper like a small tornado. Then Lily cleared her throat. It wasn't loud, but it carried enough tension that I instinctively looked up. She was standing near the dining table with a glass of water in her hands. Her shoulders were stiff.
"Megan," she said.
Something about the way she said my name made the room feel suddenly smaller. Yes, I need to tell everyone something important. My mother frowned slightly. Lily, honey, maybe this isn't the moment. No, Lily interrupted quietly. It has to be now. A strange uneasiness spread through the room. I set my paper plate down. What's going on? Lily took a breath. Then she said the sentence that would echo in my mind for weeks afterward. Jake is Daniel's son. For a moment, no one reacted. Not because they understood, because they didn't. My brain simply refused to process the words. I'm sorry, I said slowly. What did you just say? Lily's voice grew steadier, almost rehearsed. Daniel is Jake's biological father. The room went silent. I heard my mother whisper, Lily. My father straightened in his chair. Jake, thankfully, was still in the living room surrounded by toys, completely unaware of the adult conversation unfolding 10 feet away. I looked directly at my sister. There was no embarrassment on her face. No hesitation. Only determination. That's not funny, I said. I'm not joking. My hands folded calmly in front of me. When exactly did this supposed miracle happen? Her jaw tightened.
6 years ago, she said.
That would have been during my marriage. Yes. And you're claiming my husband secretly had a child with my sister. Yes. My mother put a hand to her chest. Lily, you can't just say something like that. I'm not just saying it, Lily replied. I have proof. That word landed heavily.
Proof.
She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. My stomach didn't twist the way people expect in moments like this. Instead, something colder settled inside me. I had spent 10 years married to Daniel Reed. He wasn't careless. He wasn't reckless. And he certainly wasn't the kind of man who could hide an entire child from me. Lily placed the document on the dining table and pushed it toward me. It's a written acknowledgement, she said. Daniel signed it. My father leaned forward. What kind of acknowledgement? A statement confirming he knew Jake was his son. My mother shook her head immediately. This is insane. But Lily wasn't looking at them. She was watching me, waiting for an explosion. A scream.
Tears.
Something dramatic. Instead, I calmly unfolded the paper. The document looked official enough. Typed paragraphs. A signature at the bottom. Daniel Reed. Dated a few months after Jake was born. It claimed Daniel had privately accepted paternity, but asked Lily to keep it secret to protect his marriage. The words were almost believable. Almost. Until Lily delivered the final part. Daniel wanted Jake taken care of, she said. My father's voice hardened. Where is this going? Lily answered without hesitation. Daniel's estate should support his child. Then she looked directly at me. That includes the house. The room went completely still. The house Daniel and I bought together was worth about $700,000. Half of it. That was what she was implying. My son deserves his father's inheritance, Lily continued. And legally, that includes half of Daniel's property. My mother looked horrified. Megan just buried her husband. I know, Lily said quietly. But the truth doesn't wait for convenient timing. I slowly folded the document again. Everyone in the room was staring at me, expecting grief, rage,
shock.
But inside my head, something else had already begun forming. Because Lily had just made a claim that sounded dramatic. Convincing, even. Except for one small problem. A problem my sister clearly didn't know about. Daniel Reed could not have children. And there was medical proof of that. I placed the paper back on the table. Then I looked at my sister. And for the first time since she started speaking, I felt something sharper than grief. Suspicion. I didn't react. Not the way Lily expected. No yelling. No accusations. No dramatic confrontation in the middle of a 6-year-old's birthday party. Instead, I simply looked down at the document again. Then I folded it carefully and placed it back on the table. Around me, the room felt tense, like a stretched wire ready to snap. My mother looked like she might faint. My father's face had hardened into the same expression he used when dealing with dishonest contractors at his construction company. But Lily's eyes stayed fixed on me. She was waiting for me to break, waiting for the scene she had clearly imagined. Instead, I spoke calmly. "Are you finished?" The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Your announcement," I clarified. "Is that everything?" Her eyebrows pulled together slightly. For now, I repeated quietly. Behind us, Jake laughed in the living room as he ripped open another toy box. The sound felt strangely distant from the adult tension in the kitchen. I picked up my purse from the chair. "This probably isn't the right time to discuss legal matters," I said. Lily blinked. "You're not denying it?" I met her eyes. "I'm saying this conversation doesn't belong at a child's birthday party." My mother nodded quickly.
Yes.
Exactly. We should all calm down. But Lily wasn't satisfied.
"You're avoiding it," she said.
"No," I replied. "I'm postponing it." Her voice sharpened. "Megan, my son deserves recognition. And if what you're claiming is true," I said evenly, "then the courts exist for a reason." The word courts made my father sit up straighter. Lily crossed her arms. "So you're forcing this to become legal?" "If necessary." The silence between us thickened. She had expected emotion. Instead, I was giving her procedure. That seemed to frustrate her more than anger would have. "You think I'm lying," she said. "I think," I replied carefully, "that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." She gestured toward the paper. "You just saw it." "Yes. And I'll have a lawyer review it." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. Just for a second. Then she recovered.
"Fine," she said.
I picked up my coat. "I should go." My mother hurried toward me. "You just got here." "I stayed longer than I planned," I said gently. My father followed me to the hallway. "Megan," he said quietly, "do you want me to talk to Lily?"
"No."
"You're taking this very calmly." "I'm grieving," I replied. "I don't have energy for anything else today." That part wasn't a lie. Grief and shock had numbed most of my reactions. But as I stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, another reason for my calm settled deeper in my mind. A memory. 2 years earlier, Daniel had sat across from me in a sterile white doctor's office. The urologist had spoken carefully, professionally. A rare congenital condition. Low fertility wasn't the issue. It was complete infertility. Daniel could not father biological children. We had spent weeks discussing it afterward.
Doctors. Tests.
Second opinions. The conclusion had never changed. Children would only be possible through adoption or medical assistance. It had been a painful conversation, but it was also something Lily could not possibly know. Daniel and I had kept it private, which meant one thing was now absolutely certain. Jake was not Daniel's son. Not biologically. Not medically. And if Lily truly believed the story she had just told in that kitchen, then someone had either lied to her, or she was lying to all of us. Either way, the document she showed me suddenly looked very different in my mind. Because if Daniel had never been able to have children, then that signed acknowledgement was either impossible or forged. And if my sister was willing to fake something like that, then this wasn't just family drama anymore. It was the beginning of a legal war. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of grief. Not even because of Lily's accusation. It was the document. The way she had slid it across the table so confidently. The way she had said Daniel signed it as if that ended the conversation. But documents can lie. Signatures can be copied. And desperate people can convince themselves that a lie is a solution. By midnight, I was sitting at Daniel's old desk in the corner of the living room. His desk lamp cast a soft yellow circle across the paperwork I had started gathering. Mortgage documents. Insurance policies. Bank statements. The quiet administrative skeleton of a life we had built together. The house. That was the real target. $700,000 in Seattle real estate had a way of attracting sudden family revelations. My laptop screen glowed in the dark room. I opened Daniel's digital files, scrolling slowly through folders he had organized with his usual obsessive neatness. Taxes, property records, engineering contracts. Nothing even remotely related to paternity acknowledgments, which wasn't surprising, because Daniel had never written one.
He couldn't have.
Still, Lily's confidence bothered me. People bluff all the time, but she didn't look like someone bluffing. She looked like someone who believed she had leverage. That meant one of two things. Either she had forged the document herself, or someone had helped her. I leaned back in Daniel's chair and stared at the ceiling. Then I reached for my phone. There was exactly one person I trusted to help me think through something like this.
Chris Bennett.
Chris and I had met 12 years earlier when Daniel and I were looking for a lawyer to review the purchase contract on our first apartment. Back then, Chris was a junior associate at a small Seattle firm. Now he was one of the best family attorneys in the city. And more importantly, he was a friend. I hesitated only a moment before pressing call. The phone rang 3 times.
Megan.
Chris answered. His voice immediately shifted when he recognized my number.
Hey.
I heard about Daniel.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you, I said quietly. There was a pause. What's going on? He asked. You never call this late unless something's wrong. That's because something is. I explained everything. The birthday party. The announcement. The document claiming Daniel acknowledged Jake as his son. Chris didn't interrupt. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. And she's claiming inheritance rights? Yes. Specifically the house. Yes. Another pause. Do you still have the document? I only saw it briefly.
That's fine.
We'll get it. His tone had shifted completely now. Professional. Focused. You understand what she's attempting, he said. I have a pretty good guess. If that document holds up in court, Chris continued, she could file a claim on Daniel's estate through the child. I know. But if it's fake, he added, that's a different story. It is fake. He didn't respond immediately. Megan, he said carefully, how are you so sure? Because Daniel physically couldn't father a child. The memory of that doctor's office flashed through my mind again. But I hadn't told anyone about Daniel's condition. Not even Chris.
Not yet.
Let's just say I have reasons, I replied. He accepted that answer without pushing. All right, he said. First step. We secure your position.
How?
You gather every document connected to Daniel's estate. I've already started. Good. Also, anything with his handwriting. Old letters, signatures, contracts. If someone forged that acknowledgement, we'll need comparison samples. That shouldn't be hard. Daniel kept everything. Even better. I rubbed my temple. What if she actually tries to take the house? Chris didn't hesitate. Then we fight. His voice carried quiet confidence. And Megan? Yes. Do not confront Lily again until we review that document. That wasn't my plan. Good. I looked around the silent house. Daniel's house. Our house. I'm not letting anyone rewrite Daniel's life, I said quietly. Chris's response was calm but firm. Then we make sure the truth comes out. After we hung up, I sat there for several minutes. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Finally, I stood up and walked to the hallway closet. Inside was a small metal key hanging on a hook. Daniel's storage locker key. He had rented the locker years earlier to store documents he considered too important to keep at home. Blueprint archives. Legal papers. Things he called the boring backbone of adulthood. At the time, I had laughed. Now I realized something. If Daniel had ever anticipated trouble, if he had ever left anything important behind, that locker might be the only place he hid it. And the next morning, I decided I was going to open it. The storage facility was 20 minutes from my house. Daniel had rented the locker almost 4 years earlier, explaining that engineers were natural hoarders when it came to documents. Blueprints, permits, contracts, he had told me once with a grin. If the house ever burns down, I want proof it existed. At the time, it sounded like one of his practical jokes. Now, driving there on a gray Seattle morning, the thought felt different. He had always planned ahead. The facility itself sat behind a tall metal fence with a keypad gate. Rows of long concrete buildings stretched across the property, like quiet warehouses. Inside the office, a bored clerk glanced up. "Locker number? C17?" I said. He checked the system and nodded. "You're Daniel Reed's wife?" "Yes." "Sorry for your loss," he said automatically, sliding a clipboard toward me. "Just sign here." 5 minutes later, I was standing in a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of dust and cardboard. Locker C17 was halfway down the row. A simple metal door.
A small padlock.
Daniel's key turned easily. The door rolled upward with a hollow rattle. Inside were 3 stacked plastic storage bins and a narrow metal filing cabinet. Nothing dramatic. Nothing mysterious. Just exactly what Daniel had described years ago. The boring backbone of adulthood. I knelt beside the first bin and opened it. Inside were neatly labeled folders. House purchase documents. Insurance policies. Old engineering project files. Everything arranged with Daniel's meticulous organization. The second bin contained tax records and retirement paperwork. Important things. But nothing related to Lily's claim. Which meant the third container was my last possibility. I lifted the lid. At first glance, it looked similar to the others, more folders, more labeled envelopes. But something near the bottom caught my attention. A plain brown envelope. No label. No printed text. Just my name written across the front in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. Megan. My fingers froze for a moment. Daniel had never been the type to leave emotional notes. He preferred conversations. Still, the envelope looked old. The paper slightly creased, like it had been sitting there for months. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet of lined paper. Handwritten. I recognized Daniel's careful block lettering immediately. My chest tightened as I began reading. "Megan, if you're reading this, it probably means something happened to me before I had the chance to explain this in person." I stopped breathing for a second. Daniel rarely wrote anything dramatic. But the words already carried a weight that made my stomach twist. "There's something about Lily I never told you." The room suddenly felt colder. About a year ago, when you were in Chicago for that design conference, Lily came over to the house one evening. My mind jumped back instantly. That trip. 3 days away. Daniel had stayed home finishing a project deadline. She said she needed help fixing something in her car. I didn't think anything of it. The next lines made my hands tighten on the page. But after we came back inside, she started acting strange. She told me she had always liked me. Then she said you didn't appreciate me the way she did. My heart began beating faster. I told her to stop immediately. I told her she was my wife's sister, and this conversation was inappropriate. I read the next sentence twice. She tried to kiss me. The quiet hallway around the storage lockers seemed to close in. I pushed her away and told her to leave. My throat felt dry. But the letter wasn't finished. Before she left, she said something that bothered me. She told me that if I ever told you what happened, she would make sure I regretted it. At the time, I assumed she was just embarrassed and angry. Then came the line that made my stomach drop. But a few weeks later, she hinted that she could create problems for our marriage if she wanted to. I felt a chill move through me. "I never told you because I didn't want to damage your relationship with your sister." Maybe that was a mistake. The final lines were written slightly darker, like Daniel had pressed harder with the pen. "If Lily ever tries to involve me in something dishonest, please know that I never betrayed you." I stared at the last sentence for a long time. I would never do that to you. The storage corridor was silent except for the faint buzzing of fluorescent lights overhead. Slowly, I folded the letter again. Lily's calm announcement at the birthday party replayed in my mind. Her confidence. The document she claimed Daniel had signed. The inheritance she suddenly wanted for her son. And now this letter. Daniel had been worried about Lily long before his death. Which meant one thing was becoming painfully clear. The accusation at that birthday party hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned. And if Lily was desperate enough to forge a document claiming Daniel fathered her child, then this situation was far more dangerous than simple family drama. Because people don't invent lies like that unless they're under pressure. The only question left was why. And within a few days, Chris's investigator would uncover an answer none of us were expecting. 2 days after I found Daniel's letter, I met Chris at his office downtown. Seattle looked exactly the way it always did in early spring. Gray sky, damp sidewalks, the faint smell of rain in the air. Normally, the city felt comforting to me. That morning, it felt like a courtroom waiting for a trial. Chris's office sat on the 12th floor of an older brick building near Pioneer Square. His assistant led me inside without asking questions. Chris was already standing when I walked in. He gave me a quick, careful hug. "How are you holding up?" "I've had better weeks." "That's fair." We sat across from each other at the small conference table. I slid the brown envelope toward him. "What's this?" he asked. "Something Daniel left in his storage locker." Chris opened the envelope and began reading. The room stayed completely silent while his eyes moved across the page. Halfway through the letter, his expression changed. By the time he finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "Well," he said quietly, "that explains a lot." "You believe him?" Chris looked at me like the question itself was unnecessary. "I met Daniel a dozen times over the years," he said. "He was many things. Dishonest wasn't one of them." I nodded. "Then you understand why Lily's story makes no sense." Chris tapped the letter lightly. "It also explains motive." "Motive for what?" "For creating a lie big enough to survive a courtroom." I folded my hands together. "What do we do now?" Chris turned his laptop toward me. "I already started." A photo appeared on the screen. A woman leaving a small apartment building. It took me a moment to realize who I was looking at. "Lily." Chris nodded. "I hired a private investigator yesterday." That was fast. "When someone threatens to take a $700,000 property," he said calmly, "speed is appropriate." He clicked to the next image. Lily again. This time walking into a medical clinic. "Where is that?" "Children's Hospital." My stomach tightened slightly. "Jake." "Most likely." Chris closed the photo window and opened a document instead. "This part is confidential for now," he said. "But you need to know what we're dealing with." I leaned closer to the screen. "Your sister," Chris continued, "is in serious financial trouble." "How serious?" "Credit cards maxed out. Personal loans. Late payments on her car." That surprised me. Lily had always struggled with money, but not like that. She never mentioned anything. People rarely do. Chris scrolled further. "There's more." My chest tightened. "Jake has a medical condition." "What kind of condition?" "A rare immune disorder." The words landed slowly. "Meaning?" "Meaning his body can't fight infections properly." I felt a cold wave of understanding beginning to form. "How expensive?" Chris looked directly at me. "Very." "How very?" "Treatments can reach hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Images of Jake running around the living room at the birthday party flashed through my mind. Laughing. Opening presents. Completely unaware of the adult chaos surrounding him. "Does he need treatment right now?" I asked quietly. Chris nodded. From what the investigator found, Lily has been borrowing money to keep up with medical bills. And failing. Yes. I leaned back slowly. Suddenly the pieces started aligning in a different way. The forged document. The inheritance claim. The house. "She's desperate," I said. Chris nodded once. "Desperate people do reckless things." "But claiming Daniel was the father," I murmured. "It gives her legal access to his estate," Chris said. "At least temporarily. And if she won, she could secure financial support for Jake." Silence filled the office. For the first time since the birthday party, my anger softened slightly. Not toward Lily. Toward the situation. A sick child. A mother drowning in debt. A lie big enough to destroy my husband's reputation. Chris closed the laptop. "There's still a major problem with her story," he said. "Yes," I replied quietly. "Daniel couldn't have children." Chris looked up immediately. "What?" I told him everything. The doctor. The diagnosis. The medical reports. By the time I finished, Chris was shaking his head slowly. Well, he said, that simplifies one part of this case.
How?
It means Jake absolutely cannot be Daniel's biological child. Exactly. Chris leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. But that raises a much bigger question. What question? He spoke carefully. If Jake isn't Daniel's son, then whose son is he? Chris gave a small, thoughtful nod. That, he said quietly, is exactly what the investigator is trying to find out. And neither of us had any idea that the answer would point to someone even closer to Daniel's family than Lily had ever expected. 3 days later, Chris called me early in the morning. His voice sounded different. Not tense, not rushed, but careful. Megan, he said, are you home? Yes.
Good.
I think you should sit down before we talk. That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty coffee cup Daniel used every morning. All right, I said quietly. What did the investigator find? There was a short pause. First, Chris said, we confirmed something important. Lily has been actively searching for ways to claim Daniel's estate. That part doesn't surprise me. She contacted 2 different attorneys before showing up at that birthday party. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. What did she tell them? That her son's father recently died and she had written acknowledgement of paternity. Exactly the story she had performed in my parents' kitchen. So she's committed to the lie, I said. Yes. Chris paused again. But that's not the part you need to hear. A quiet tension filled the line. What else did you find? Our investigators started looking into Lily's past relationships around the time Jake was conceived. That would be about 6.5 years ago. Correct. And Chris exhaled slowly. At first, nothing unusual showed up. Meaning, no long-term partner. No serious boyfriend. No obvious father. That didn't surprise me. Lily had always been private about her relationships. Almost secretive. Then, Chris continued. The investigator looked at something else. What? People she spent time with during that period. I waited. And then he said a name that made my heart stop for a moment. Robert Reed. Daniel's father. For several seconds, I didn't respond. That's not funny, I said finally. I'm not joking. That doesn't make sense. I know. Daniel's father had been one of the most respected men I had ever met. A retired engineering professor from the University of Washington.
Calm. Disciplined.
Quietly brilliant. He had treated me like a daughter from the day Daniel introduced us. And he had adored Jake. But that didn't mean... No, I said immediately. That's impossible. Chris spoke carefully. Megan, we're not saying anything definitively yet. Then why bring him up? Because the investigator found multiple records showing Lily visited Robert's house frequently during the year before Jake was born. I tried to remember that time. 6 years ago. Daniel and I had been busy renovating the house. Robert had still been living alone in Tacoma after Daniel's mother passed away. He helped her fix things around the house sometimes, I said. That's possible, Chris agreed. But neighbors remember Lily visiting late at night more than once. A strange, uncomfortable feeling crept into my chest. That still doesn't prove anything.
No.
Chris hesitated before continuing. But there's another piece. What? Financial transfers. My stomach dropped slightly. From who to who? From Robert Reed to Lily Parker. How much? Several payments over 8 months. For what? That part isn't labeled. Silence filled the line. Robert Reed had died 3 months earlier. A sudden heart attack while gardening in his backyard. The entire family had mourned him deeply. Especially Daniel. Now the investigator was suggesting something that felt almost unthinkable. You're implying Jake might be Robert's child, I said slowly. We're considering the possibility. That would mean... I couldn't even finish the sentence. That Lily had a relationship with her brother-in-law's father, Chris said quietly. The words sounded as disturbing as the idea itself. That's insane. Maybe, he replied. But it would explain something. What? Why Lily didn't name a father for Jake when he was born. And why she suddenly invented Daniel now, I said softly. Chris agreed. Daniel is dead, he said, which means he can't deny the claim. And Robert is also dead. Yes. Leaving only one person alive who could challenge the story.
Me.
My chest felt tight. If Jake is actually Robert's son, I said slowly, then legally, he could have inheritance rights through Daniel's family line. I closed my eyes. That would make this entire situation even worse. Yes, Chris said quietly. But we still need proof. What kind of proof? A DNA test would settle everything. With who? I asked. Robert is gone. Chris paused. But Daniel isn't. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? There may still be biological samples stored from Daniel's medical tests. The realization hit me instantly. Hospital records, genetic material, medical labs kept those things for years. If we compare Jake's DNA with Daniel's, Chris continued, we can prove whether they were related. And if they aren't, then Lily's document collapses immediately. I stared at the quiet kitchen, the calm house Daniel and I had shared, the house Lily had tried to claim through a lie. What happens if the test shows Jake is Robert's son? I asked. Chris's answer came carefully. Then the legal situation becomes complicated. I believed him, because at that moment, the truth we were uncovering was no longer just about money. It was about a secret inside Daniel's family that no one had ever imagined. And if it turned out to be real, the confrontation that followed would tear open a past none of us were prepared to face. A week after Chris told me about the investigation, he arranged a meeting. Neutral ground. His office. Don't tell Lily what we know yet, he had warned me on the phone. Let her talk first. So on a gray Thursday afternoon, I found myself sitting once again at the same conference table.
Chris sat beside me.
Across from us was Lily. She arrived 10 minutes late, carrying a large purse and the same rigid confidence she had shown at Jake's birthday party. But the moment she noticed Chris, her expression tightened. You brought a lawyer, she said. Chris offered a polite smile. Family situations with legal claims tend to benefit from clarity. Lily pulled out a chair and sat down. I'm not here to fight, she said. That's good, Chris replied calmly, because we're here to establish facts. Lily's eyes flicked toward me. You still think I'm lying? I didn't answer.
Chris spoke instead.
You claimed Daniel Reed acknowledged paternity of your son. Yes. You also presented a written document. Yes. Chris folded his hands. We've reviewed it. Lily's chin lifted slightly. And it contains several inconsistencies. Her confidence wavered just a little. What kind of inconsistencies? Chris slid a printed page across the table. A handwriting specialist compared the signature with multiple verified signatures from Daniel Reed. Lily didn't touch the paper. And the probability of forgery is extremely high. The room went silent. For the first time since this situation began, Lily looked uncertain. That's ridiculous, she said. Chris didn't raise his voice. We also know Daniel had a medical condition that made biological paternity impossible. Her head snapped toward me. You told him that? I didn't have to, Chris replied calmly. Medical records exist. Lily's breathing grew slightly faster. That doesn't prove anything. Chris leaned forward. It proves Daniel Reed could not be Jake's father. The air in the room felt suddenly heavy. Lily looked between us. Then she laughed. But the sound wasn't confident anymore.
Fine, she said.
Maybe Daniel didn't know. Megan knew, Chris replied. That shut the laughter down immediately. For several seconds, Lily said nothing. Then her shoulders slowly slumped. You don't understand, she murmured. Chris remained calm. Then help us understand. Her eyes dropped to the table. When Jake got sick, everything changed. The tension in her voice sounded different now. Less defensive. More exhausted. The treatments are expensive, she continued quietly. Insurance doesn't cover most of it. I didn't speak. Chris let the silence work. I tried everything, Lily said. Loans. Credit cards. Friends. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm drowning. Chris nodded once. We're aware of the financial pressure. She looked up sharply. You investigated me? When someone attempts to claim part of a $700,000 property, he replied calmly, it becomes necessary. Her shoulders sagged further. I didn't want to hurt anyone, she whispered. You forged a legal document, Chris said evenly. Tears appeared suddenly in her eyes. I panicked. About what? I asked quietly. She looked at me for the first time since the meeting began. Jake needs treatment. Her voice shook now, and I couldn't afford it. Silence filled the room again. Chris spoke carefully. That still doesn't explain why you chose Daniel. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I thought it would be the least complicated.
How? Chris asked.
Because Daniel is dead. The blunt honesty of that sentence made my chest tighten. He can't deny it, she said. And Megan has the house. Chris studied her quietly. That explanation still leaves one very important question. Lily didn't respond.
Chris said it anyway.
If Daniel wasn't Jake's father, then who is? Her breathing became uneven. For several seconds, she just stared at the table. Then she whispered something so quietly, I almost didn't hear it. Robert. My heart stopped for a moment. Chris didn't react. Robert Reed, he asked calmly. Lily nodded slowly. Yes. The room went completely silent. He helped me when I was struggling, she continued weakly. After my divorce. After losing my job. Her voice trembled. It only happened once. I felt a strange coldness spread through my chest. Daniel's father. The quiet professor who had welcomed me into the family. The man Daniel had admired his entire life. He felt terrible about it afterward, Lily said. We both did. Chris spoke carefully. And Jake. Her eyes filled with tears again. I didn't know I was pregnant until weeks later. Did Robert know? Chris asked. Yes. What was his reaction? He helped financially for a while. That explained the transfers Chris had discovered. But he begged me not to tell Daniel, she continued. Why? He said it would destroy their relationship. The words hung heavily in the air. And after Robert died, Chris said slowly, you lost that support. Lily nodded. When Jake's medical bills started piling up, I panicked. She looked at me again. I knew Daniel was gone. I knew you had the house. Her voice broke. So, I created the document. No one spoke for several seconds. The truth had finally surfaced. And it was uglier than any of us expected. Because the lie Lily told at that birthday party hadn't just been about money. It had been built on a secret that could have destroyed Daniel's entire family if it had come out while he was alive. The room stayed silent long after Lily finished speaking. Outside Chris's office window, Seattle traffic moved slowly through the wet afternoon streets. Normal life continued only a few floors below us. But inside that conference room, everything felt suspended. Lily sat with her head lowered, her hands twisted together on the table. I didn't want it to happen like this, she whispered. Chris remained calm, but his voice carried weight when he finally spoke. You forged a legal document claiming a dead man fathered your child, he said. That's not a small mistake. Lily nodded weakly. I know. You attempted to claim half of Megan's home. I know. Her voice sounded hollow now. Chris leaned back slightly in his chair. If Megan chooses to pursue this legally, he continued, forgery and attempted estate fraud are serious charges. Lily's eyes widened with quiet fear. You'd send me to prison? Chris didn't answer. Because the decision wasn't his. Both of them looked at me. I hadn't spoken for several minutes. Not since Lily admitted the truth. Inside my mind, Daniel's letter replayed over and over. Please know that I never betrayed you. He hadn't. Everything Lily claimed about him had been a lie. That mattered to me more than the house. More than the money. Daniel's reputation was intact. And the truth about his loyalty to me would never be questioned again. But there was another image I couldn't ignore.
Jake.
A 6-year-old boy blowing out birthday candles. Laughing. Completely unaware of the adult's mistakes shaping his future. Punishing Lily would feel satisfying. But Jake would pay the real price. I looked at her. Does Jake know anything about this? Her head snapped up.
No.
Does he know about Robert? She shook her head quickly. He just thinks his dad isn't around. Chris spoke quietly. He deserves honesty eventually. I know, Lily whispered. But he doesn't deserve this kind of scandal. Silence returned. I folded my hands on the table. Chris, I said calmly, if I report this forgery, what happens next? He answered carefully. The document becomes evidence. And Lily? She could face criminal charges. And Jake? Chris hesitated. His life becomes part of the investigation, which meant reporters,
Courtrooms.
public records, a sick child dragged through adult consequences. I closed my eyes briefly. Daniel had always been protective of Jake, even when he was just the fun uncle building Lego towers. If Daniel were sitting in this room right now, what would he want? Probably the same thing he always wanted.
Peace.
I opened my eyes again. I'm not pressing charges. Chris looked at me carefully. You're sure? Yes. Lily stared at me in disbelief. You're letting this go? Not exactly, I said calmly. Her hope faded slightly. Chris leaned forward again. There will still be conditions. Lily nodded immediately. Anything. You withdraw every claim involving Daniel's estate, Chris said. Of course. You formally acknowledge the document was fabricated. Yes. And you sign a legal statement confirming Daniel Reed was never Jake's father. Lily swallowed hard. I'll sign whatever you want. I spoke again. There's one more condition. She looked at me nervously. What? You tell Jake the truth one day. Her eyes filled with tears again. When he's older, she whispered. Yes. Not the full adult complexity, but enough honesty that he wouldn't grow up believing a lie about the man who had never been his father. Chris turned slightly toward me. There's still the medical situation. I nodded. That part had been sitting in the back of my mind the entire meeting. Daniel's mother, Margaret Reed. She had lost her husband only months earlier. Then her son. The idea that she might also have a secret grandson somewhere in the world would shake her deeply. But it was still the truth. And Jake still needed help. We'll speak to Margaret, I said quietly. Chris understood immediately. If she agrees, he added, the Reed family could help cover Jake's treatments. Lily's face collapsed in relief. You'd really do that? I looked at her calmly. For Jake. Not for her. Never for the lie she tried to build. But for the small boy who had unknowingly connected two broken parts of a family. Lily covered her mouth as she started crying. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. I believe she was. But some damage can't be undone. Trust, once broken, doesn't return easily. Still, the war she tried to start ended quietly in that room. No court. No public humiliation. Just the truth and the consequences that followed it. And for the first time since Daniel died, I felt something inside my chest finally begin to settle. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close to peace. A year passed before life began to feel steady again. Grief doesn't disappear. It simply changes shape. Some days I still reached for my phone to tell Daniel something before remembering he wasn't there anymore. Some mornings I still caught myself listening for the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. But time did something quiet and important. It softened the sharp edges. The legal papers Chris prepared were signed 2 weeks after our meeting. Lily formally withdrew every claim against Daniel's estate. The forged document was destroyed and replaced with a notarized statement confirming that Daniel Reed had never been Jake's father. The house remained mine, just as Daniel had intended. There were no courtrooms, no public scandals, only a quiet legal file sitting in Chris Bennett's office. But the most difficult conversation happened somewhere else. Margaret Reed, Daniel's mother. I visited her small house in Tacoma on a Sunday afternoon. She opened the door slowly, still moving with the careful stiffness that had appeared after Robert's death. Seeing me always made her smile gently. Megan, she said, come in. We sat at the same dining table where Daniel had grown up doing homework decades earlier. I didn't rush the conversation. Margaret had already lost her husband and her son within a single year. But truth has a way of finding its own moment. When I finally explained everything, She didn't speak for a long time. She simply stared at the table, her hands folded quietly in front of her. Finally, she said something that surprised me. "That sounds like Robert." I looked up. "You're not shocked." She sighed softly. "Your father-in-law was a good man," she said. "But he was also human." Her voice carried sadness, but not anger. "Loneliness makes people do things they regret." I nodded slowly. "That doesn't excuse what happened." "No," she agreed. "But it explains it." Margaret asked many questions. About Lily. About Jake. About the illness. And when she heard about the treatments, she sat silently again. Daniel had inherited Robert's careful, thoughtful nature. Now I saw where it came from. Finally, Margaret looked at me. "How old is the boy now?" 6. "And he's sick?" "Yes." She stood up slowly and walked to a cabinet near the window. From it she pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were documents, savings certificates, retirement accounts, Robert's careful lifetime of planning. Margaret closed the box again and returned to the table. "He's still Robert's grandson," she said quietly. "And Daniel loved that child." I felt my chest tighten slightly. "So we help him," she continued. And that was the end of the discussion. Margaret insisted on covering most of Jake's treatment costs. I helped organize the logistics. Chris arranged the legal structure to keep everything clean and protected. Lily kept her word. She never mentioned Daniel again. And slowly, cautiously, something unexpected began to happen. The distance between us stopped growing. It didn't disappear. Some fractures remained permanent. But over time, the anger lost its sharpness. Jake's treatments started showing results after several months. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. By the time a full year had passed, his immune system was stronger. Not perfect, but improving. One afternoon that summer, I visited my parents' house again. This time the atmosphere was different. No tension. No secrets waiting to explode. Jake ran across the yard the moment he saw me. "Aunt Megan." He wrapped his arms around my waist with the same unfiltered joy he always had. Behind him, Lily stood quietly near the porch. Not defensive. Not demanding. Just tired. And grateful. Margaret arrived a few minutes later, carrying a small box of cookies she had baked that morning. Jake ran to her next. "Grandma Margaret." The words still felt new, but Margaret smiled warmly as she hugged him. I stood there watching the strange, fragile shape our family had taken. It wasn't the life Daniel and I had planned. Betrayal had changed too many things. But somehow, through truth and difficult choices, something else had grown in its place. Not perfect, not simple, but real. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I stood alone near the fence at the edge of the yard. For the first time in months, the quiet inside my mind felt calm. Daniel's letter had ended with one sentence that stayed with me. "Please know that I never betrayed you." He hadn't. The lies that followed his death hadn't changed the truth of the man he was. And in the end, that truth protected everything that mattered. I didn't destroy anyone. No revenge. No courtroom victories. Just honesty. Because sometimes justice isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about making sure the innocent people, like a 6-year-old boy, don't have to pay for the mistakes of the adults around them. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something simple. Daniel's family hadn't ended. It had just become something none of us expected.